Welcome to the Edinburgh International Book Festival. Thank you very much indeed for coming. I'm Sheena McDonald, I'm a journalist, and it's my pure delight to introduce to you someone who you think you know. He's certainly an old friend of Edinburgh. He's a prodigious writer. Today, he's going to be talking about his latest production, and it is a production. It's a beautifully crafted little book of 30, that is 30 playlets, Matchbox Theatre. Please welcome Michael Frayn.
Good afternoon. It's absolutely wonderful to be back in Edinburgh. We spent the morning in the Museum of Modern Art looking at the Escher exhibition. And if you haven't seen it, I do recommend you go. It's absolutely wonderful. What I thought I'd do is just say a few words to introduce the book, explain what it's about, and then hand myself over to cross-examination by prosecuting counsel here, who will destroy my alibi and get me sent down for 5 years. So Matchbox is called Matchbox Theatre, and I got the title from these little Matchbox theatres, which are so small you probably can't see them, even though I'm holding up 3 of them, which I buy from Pollock's in Covent Garden in London. They're made by a firm in Germany called Wetzel in Heilbronn, and I buy them as, often in bulk, as first night presents. Particularly suitable for the cast of my play Noises Off, because it's about the theatre, so little Matchbox theatres seem very suitable. Also, they're rather cheap as first night presents go. And in each of these matchboxes, small as they are, there is the complete set of a show. In one there's Commedia dell'arte. In this one, there's the Kasperl Theatre, which is the German version of Punch and Judy, and so on. And you've got all the sets for the shows, and you've even got little actors, 2 centimeters high. Curiously, what you haven't got in any of these shows is the text of the show that they're doing. So in my Matchbox Theatre, I've supplied the texts. In fact, I've supplied the text not just of one play, but of 30 different plays. What sort of plays? Well, the first one is set in a church, and it derives slightly from that wonderful poem by Philip Larkin called An Arundel Tomb. If you remember, it's about the effigies, 15th century effigies on a tomb in Chichester Cathedral of a knight and his wife. And as Larkin looks at it, he realizes that the man has slipped off his mailed glove, he's all in armor, and is holding his wife's hand. And the poem ends up, what will survive of us is love. Well, both Larkin's iconography and his interpretation of the tomb have been challenged by experts. In my case, it's about a stone couple lying on a tomb, not cardboard figures, but good solid stone figures, who've also been lying on their tomb for 600 years, but unlike Larkin's couple, the relations between my couple have deteriorated slightly. And of course, we're spending 600 years in an unheated church with nothing to do. The next play is more up to date. It's set in the offices of the Nobel Prize authorities in Stockholm. And it's about the official whose job it is to phone Nobel Prize winners with the good news that they've won the Nobel Prize. And the trouble is, every time he picks up the phone and says, "Congratulations, you have won," the phone at the other end has been slammed down and he can't think why. So he's getting very frustrated. Anyway, so it goes on like this. And some of the plays are monologues, some of them are duologues. One of them is for about 30 or 40 actors who get every conceivable sort of thing. What we haven't got in this box, sadly, is any set or any actors. And some more demanding customers might say, wouldn't it have been better if you'd included the actors in the box? Well, it's absolutely true. I just couldn't get actors small enough to fit in the box. But actors are a very essential part of theatrical entertainment. They get a very bad press. People describe them as lovies, and they say they're narcissistic, self-obsessed, and so forth. Well, I've worked a lot with actors over the years, and the more I've worked with them, the more I've admired them. Some of them, I suppose, have got bad characters, but then some hedge fund managers are self-obsessed. Some insurance agents are narcissistic. Most of the actors I know are very outgoing and very collaborative people, because it's a terrifying profession. To actually go on in front of an audience, particularly on a first night, and know you've got 2 hours to do your stuff to this audience, the stuff you've learned, and you can't stop like a writer can and rewrite if something goes wrong. You have to keep going for 2 hours, is very frightening. And actors do get terrified. Some of them have breakdowns and can't go on. But because it's so terrifying, they tend to make common cause. And there's a lot of friendship and comradeship among actors, more than I think in other professions. It takes not only moral courage to go and do that, but if you're in a farce like Noises Off, it also takes a lot of physical courage. Because if you've got a lot of slamming doors and staircases and things, it's very easy to get your fingers trapped in the door or fall down the staircase and hurt yourself. And whenever I have to talk to a new company who are doing Noises Off, I say, I'm only going to say 3 words, health and safety. Because I've seen a lot of actors hurt themselves doing that play. I've seen a pool of blood collecting on the stage, which another actor had to come down stage and conceal from the audience. I've seen an actor getting hit by a flying cactus where the people are throwing the props around, and the cactus came around and cut this actor across his forehead, and blood poured down his face. He attempted to go on with the show, but trouble is he couldn't see what he was doing, and eventually we had to bring the curtain down. Well, that's one of the advantages of putting a show in a matchbox. I've never heard of anyone getting hit on the head by a flying cactus inside a matchbox. So yes, it would have been better if we'd crammed in some actors, and it would have been better still if we'd got an audience inside the box, because an audience is another essential part of the living theatre. You can't do a play just with actors on the stage and no one watching them. It's just balmy people talking to themselves. I mean, if Sheena and I were up here on our own today and there was no one out there, and I was talking to you and then Sheena was talking to you later on, we'd just be 2 crazies. We wouldn't be doing a show at all. The audience is an essential part.
We could laugh at each other.
Is what? We could laugh at
each
other. But then
other.
You'd have been an audience for me and I'd have been an audience for you.
Which could be hilarious.
Yeah. What you can't do is a show entirely without an audience. And the audience is very important because you get a kind of feedback between audience and actors. Actors sense if a show is going well. They sense if an audience is responding. And they can't help, quite unconsciously, their performance getting a little better. And the audience, quite unconsciously, sense that something is happening and their response gets stronger. What scientists call positive feedback. You can also, I regret to say, get what scientists call negative feedback. And I have seen a show which has been perfectly good. If in previews, you have to go and see your show over and over again. I've seen a show which has been perfectly good for 5 nights. On the 6th night, just disappear down the plug hole because for some reason this interaction didn't work. Well, audiences are also an audience for themselves. It's a very important part of the theatrical process that the audience are aware of the reactions of other people around them. Particularly true in the case of comedy and farce. Somebody did some research recently, and they demonstrated that the strongest trigger for laughter was not a mother-in-law joke or somebody's trousers falling off. It was the sound of other people laughing. And there's one particularly famous instance of this, the Tanganyika laughing epidemic. I don't know if you've come across this. But in 1962, when Tanzania was then called Tanganyika, administered by the British, in a girls' school somewhere, 3 girls started laughing. Well, many girls in many girls' schools throughout the world have laughed, sometimes 3 of them together. But for some reason, this caught other girls' fancy, and gradually other people in the school started to laugh, until literally half the school was laughing and couldn't stop. And the authorities had to close the school down. But by this time, the infection, just like cholera or Ebola or whatever, had spread to other schools. And in the end, the authorities had to close down 18 schools and keep them closed for half a year. This may be, of course, what was troubling the Deputy Prime Minister of Turkey when he made his famous statement recently about it being wrong for women to laugh in public. It wasn't a religious issue, it was just a public health matter. Audiences don't always get the credit for the difficulty of their job. If you look at accounts of audiences in the 17th, 18th, even in the 19th century, they're very different from modern audiences. They talk to each other, they go in and out, they shout rude insults at the stage. And it's come to be accepted in the 20th century that on the whole, audiences sit quietly and accept what's going on. You hear a lot of stories about the bad behavior of audiences, people who leave their mobile phones on and even answer them. But the curious thing is how rarely that happens, considering we all carry mobile phones around all the time, that most people, most of the time, do shut their phones off in the theatre. It's also true that you don't have to have a mobile phone to cause a disruption in the audience. Michael Codron, the theatre producer who's produced most of my plays, has a collection of stories about what he's heard happen in audiences. And he said that one night in a performance of Hedda Gabler, you'll remember, at the end, Hedda goes out with the gun. And there's a heart-stopping silence as everyone waits for the inevitable. And in that silence, in this particular performance, he heard an American woman in row A of the stalls whisper very loudly to her companion, "Does she do it or does she chicken out?" David Hare has just published his memoirs. You may have read an extract from them in The Guardian last Saturday. And he talks about the awful things you overhear audiences saying if you're connected with the production. I can remember sitting waiting for the Noises Off to start one night, empty seats just in front of me, and just before the curtain went up, a large party came in, family party, occupied the seats, began opening boxes of chocolates with lots of crackling of paper and so forth. And the woman opened the program. And just as the lights went down and the curtain went up, she said, "Oh no, I thought this was by Alan Ayckbourn." David Hare remembers, you hear even worse things at the end of the show. I've worked in the theatre for 40 years. I've never heard, well, obviously what you want to hear at the end of the show is people saying to each other, "Well, that was marvellous." I worked in the theatre for 40 years, and I have never heard anything good said about any of my shows. David Hare says he came out of one of his plays one night, and there was a couple walking in front of him, young couple, and the woman put her arms around the man and said, "I'm sorry, that was my idea." And Michael Codron again said he came out of a show one night and was a very depressed looking middle-aged couple going out just in front of him. And the man said, well, all we need now is to find the dog's been sick in the car. He assures me that this was not after one of my plays. So, curiously, the wheel has gone full circle, because where I began my career was writing short plays. I wrote them for puppets. When I was a boy, I built myself a puppet theatre and my own puppets. And the theatre didn't stand upright, and the puppets were all terrible. I just did it because I was imitating a friend of mine who was very good with his hands. And my puppets, it's very difficult to actually make puppets do anything, even if you're a good puppeteer. And if you're a bad puppeteer and you've got rotten puppets, really the only gestures that you can make them make is that, which expresses emotion, and that, which expresses extreme emotion. And also they tend, if you're reading the text for them behind the scenes, they tend to sort of lean drunkenly against the scenery. And if you take your hand away in order to turn over the page of your script, they then collapse completely. Well, I've had better actors than that since. But that is what I began to write. I began to write plays for my puppets to perform. Can't remember for the life of me what these plays were about. But when I began to write stuff when I was a bit older, a teenager and a student and so forth, what I wrote was reviews, because that's what everyone went to then. I wrote review material. And I went on until my last year at Cambridge, when I was a member of the Footlights Club, and we did an annual show, which we did in Cambridge, and would then go to London and be in a West End theatre for a week. Very important showcase for all of us. We were all very ambitious. And the show that I wrote, the May Week show that I wrote, was the first one not to go to London. Why? Because it wasn't funny. And like the fox in the fable, I turned against the grapes and said, well, the theatre's a terrible place. No one likes the theatre. You're just embarrassed going, you're just waiting for actors to drop their props or forget their lines. So I turned against the theatre completely, and spent, when I began to write a humorous column in the newspapers, spent a lot of those columns mocking the theatre and saying how awful it was. So how did I get drawn back in? Well, it was short plays once again. I had a friend who was doing a performance, an evening of short plays, which was going to the West End, and he was one short. And he said, would I write a one-act play, and the theme of the evening was the state of marriage. Well, it's very difficult to resist a challenge, and much as I despised the theatre, I said I'd have a go. So I wrote a very simple-minded play about a young couple who make a nostalgic return visit to their honeymoon hotel in Venice. Only now they've got a small baby, and the play was about what a difference children make to the lives of their parents. So I handed it in, and a week later the director rang me and said, I'm terribly sorry, but the producer says he can't do this play because it's too filthy. Well, the producer was a man called Alexander Cohen, a New York producer, Broadway producer, who was working on this occasion in London. And his great speciality was doing difficult shows. He had managed to introduce New York audiences, Broadway audiences, to The Homecoming. Very difficult play to do for a commercial theatre at that time in New York. And I said, Alex Cohen says, my play is too filthy. And the director says, yes, Alex says he could never do a show in which a baby's nappy is changed on stage. Well, I was so maddened by this, I wrote 3 more short plays and had an evening of my own short plays, and that was my first show in the theatre. It's called The Two of Us. And I'd like to tell you that my persistence was rewarded and I had a success, but I didn't. I had another colossal flop. And in those days, not only did you get bad reviews, but in those days there was something called the gallery claque, a group of friends who used to come to first nights and sit up in the gallery. And in the interval they'd go out and have a drink together and decide whether they liked the show or not. And if they didn't, they would come back and catcall Act 2 and boo the cast at the end. Well, they didn't like my show, and they came back and they catcalled Act Two, and they booed the cast at the end, which was bad enough. But then they caught me in the street outside afterwards and booed me as well. And I thought it was carrying criticism a little far. However, one good thing came out of that evening. Richard Briers, who was half the cast, Richard Briers and Lynn Redgrave, it was called The Two of Us, two performers. Richard Briers gave me as a first night present a biography of Noel Coward. Well, I didn't know much about Noel Coward. I just knew he'd had a life of unbroken, glittering success. But when I read the biography, I discovered it wasn't like that at all. He'd had many, many catastrophes, failures. In fact, one so disastrous, a light comedy called The Marquise, that not only had it been booed and catcalled, and not only was he booed by by theatregoers in the street outside afterwards, they'd actually spat at him, which seems very extreme. It was not because he was advancing any unpopular philosophical or political ideas. They just didn't think the show was funny, so they spat at him. But the moral of this story was that failure tends to be forgotten because in its very nature, a flop doesn't last very long, whereas success gets seen by a lot of people and tends to be remembered. So if you can remain on your feet long enough, if you can keep going, people tend to remember the successes and forget the flops. Well, that was how I got back into the theatre. And I think I'm going to hand over now to my to prosecuting counsel here and wait to be cross-examined.
Thank you. Your satire in this new book, it's never cruel, although we recognise the characters and the caricatures that we meet here. But you're a great apologist, really, for the human condition, aren't you?
I'm a great apologist for the human condition.
Yes, and when you accept it as it is, which is fundamentally absurd. There
was a famous woman in America in the 19th century who said, I accept the universe. Somebody said, what else could she do? Yeah, I accept the world. Yeah, well, thank you. Very nice to see you. Yeah.
How did you choose the characters who are satirized in here? I know there's a politician. Well, why did you pick on these particular individuals?
Which politicians am I satirizing?
We don't know.
Oh, I see, right. Well, I don't think they're individuals. I think there's one piece about politicians who keep saying, what is it he keeps saying?
Let me be clear.
Let me be clear, yes. Let me be clear about this. Or I've always been clear that so-and-so. And politicians of all persuasions say that all the time. They always have been clear about everything and are now clear about things and are going to be clear about things in the future. What they have been, are, and are going to be clear about is sometimes a little more opaque.
As you will find out when you read this book, did you actually write them to be performed in the reader's head or on stage? I think they have been performed, some of them on stage, haven't they? Or by couples.
Well, I just wrote them as they occurred to me. I didn't really think what was going to be done with them. And one day, I showed them to my wife, Claire Tomlin, and she's sitting here in the front row, so I've got to be careful what I say. And she rather sneakily went behind my back and showed them to my publisher, Faber. And Faber said, I think it was Claire who said, why don't you do these as a book? And Faber said they would, and they did this beautiful thing made up to look like a matchbox, in a slip cover. And you put it out here, you can see all the plays are done as matches inside. And then we did it, so it came out as a book, and that was what I thought it was, a book for people to do. And sometimes friends have told us that they do actually perform the pieces at home. And then it was done as a show at the Hampstead Theatre, and although it was brilliantly done, directed and cast, it didn't really quite take off, I regret to say. as a show.
Well, it might work better just doing it at home. I mean, you might when you because Michael after this is going to go to the signing tent. You might want to buy 2 copies because I can no honestly I can do. My husband and I had great fun performing these. Actually, Alan, are you here? Was that an audience member or was that Alan? I haven't got the right specs on. Oh, yes. Would you be willing to come and do a little... You'll have to steal the roving mic.
I understood it to be saying, no, I'm not here.
Well, since you mentioned mobile phone, we'll just do a short one. We'll do the... Well, it's called... It's called Between Cheese and Jam.
Just before we start, just remember, that's for expressing emotion.
This is for radio.
Okay.
Shall I start?
Okay.
Between Cheese and Jam. Hi, it's me. I've been trying to phone you. I was getting worried.
Why? What's happened?
Nothing's happened. You kept saying engaged.
Yes, because I was trying to phone you.
You were trying to phone me. Why? What happened?
Nothing's happened. I was trying to phone you, that's all.
To tell me that nothing's happened?
No, to find out why you were trying to phone me. I was getting worried. I thought something might be the matter.
I was just worried that there might be something wrong with your phone.
That's what you were phoning me for, because you were worried that there might be something wrong with my phone. This is so like... This is so like real life.
Yes, because if there was something wrong with your phone and something had happened, I shouldn't have known and I should have been worried.
You'd have been worried if something had happened and you hadn't known.
Of course I should have been.
How could you have been worried if something had happened and you hadn't known?
Because I wouldn't have known I hadn't known.
Exactly.
That's what I'm saying.
Anyway, nothing had happened.
No, as it happens. Well, as long as you're all right.
Fine.
So where are you?
Oh, no.
What? What's happened?
Nothing's happened. It's just that we seem to be turning into one of those couples who keep phoning each other, saying, where are you? I'm in Tesco's. Where are you?
You're in Tesco's?
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is...
You're not in Tesco's?
That I don't want to start saying, I'm in Tesco's.
So are you in Tesco's or aren't you?
Well, I am in Tesco's, as it happens. Why? Where are you?
In Tesco's.
You're in Tesco's.
Just by the cheese. Oh, I can see you. Over by the jam. I'm looking straight at you. I'm waving. Can you see me?
Of course I can see you.
I'm walking towards you.
I know.
I'm almost there. I'm right in front of you. I'll say bye-bye then. Speak to you soon. No, I mean...
I have to say that my wife says I didn't write these texts. I didn't invent them. I just simply wrote down the conversations that she and I had.
I'm so glad you said that, because I didn't want to ask a rude question. And I was going to say my husband wanted to know whether it's autobiographical, but you've explained. You are master of the written word, be it play or novel. These are short, and it made me, I was reading them and I was thinking, is it harder to write short pieces than it is to write novels or plays?
No, I honestly think it's easier. I'd like to say it's harder because it sounds more paradoxical. But length is quite hard. And I greatly, none of my books, very few of my books are long. And I greatly admire those writers who do write long books, because sustaining the effort of writing a long book is quite difficult. If you're writing a book, you've got this story in your head, and you feel as if you're walking on a tightrope over the Niagara Falls or whatever, as those tightrope walkers used to do, with carrying massive of chairs and poles and heaven knows what on their heads. And you feel as if you're carrying this terrible burden across a tightrope, and you might lose your footing at any moment and drop the whole lot into Niagara Falls. And for that to go on for a year or whatever it takes to write a short book is bad enough, but if you're writing War and Peace or the kind of novels that serious American novelists write now, it must go on for 5, 10 years. The strain must be frightful.
I'm quite surprised to hear you say that, because I read recently that you thought no book should be longer than 20,000 words, and people should be taxed per word over 20,000.
Well, my point was that Wittgenstein's Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, his first book, is about 20,000 words long. And if Wittgenstein could give a complete account of the logical universe in 20,000 words, I don't see why it should take anybody else any longer to do anything. And I certainly propose that well, people should be free to write books of any length at all, but they should be charged at so much per word, over 20,000 words, and that money should be redistributed to people who manage to write less than 20,000 words.
Yes, I was observing before the festival that the Magna Carta is, I think, 1,500 words long, and my husband was chairing a session with a man who'd written a book about it, which was 600 pages long. And but he said afterwards he spoke very, very well, and it was actually very interesting. So there you go. Tell me about, I mean, you've written serious plays, comic plays, short plays. I think you've written a book of philosophy. Tell me about writing comedy. How do you, what do you speak it to yourself? Do you make yourself, how do you do it?
Well, comedies or not comedies, I think it's a good idea, even if you're writing straight prose, it's a good idea to actually read it aloud to yourself. Because you make terrible discoveries. When you read something aloud, you suddenly hear terrible clashes and inconsistencies that you hadn't noticed when you were just, or I was on the line. And that certainly goes for comedy. I don't know, I've often said this, that people say, how do you write the things? Well, if you write fiction, you have to do a lot of hard work beforehand, trying to invent the story and invent characters. But when you start writing the story, it seems to me, the characters, sooner or later, take over. They begin to do things and say things themselves. Well, in one way, their assistance is very welcome. It's very nice to have some of the work done for you. But it's just like bringing up children. They don't always see eye to eye with your plans. You've spent all this time inventing the plot for them and inventing them, and how do they reward you? By wishing to do some other story altogether. And as with children, or as with industrial management, you have to you have to come to terms with them. You have to either bully them or persuade them, or agree to do partly what they want to do in return for their doing a bit of what you want to do. Writers often hate people saying this because it sounds so whimsical and twee, but I'm very pleased to see that David Hare said something very similar in his memoirs. He says, whatever ideas you start out with, the characters often turn out to have rather different ideas, and the story takes a different turn as you write it.
Now, traditionally, as you know, these events are conversations, so if any, and given that Michael, in his opening remarks, talked about the breadth of his corpus, if you'd like to make a comment, because not all of you will have read these playlets yet, so if you've got anything you'd like to ask or say, actually, I'll put my specs that I can see better with on, so I can see if there are any hands in the air. Just put your hand up. Oh, there we go. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for your...
Could you Elvis into the mic, please?
Yes, of course.
Thank you, that's better.
Thank you very much. I want to ask about, as a crossover between plays and novels, which of your novel would you most like to be turned into a play or a film that hasn't already, and why?
Well, I have 3 novels which are in various stages, I hope, of becoming films. I've written the screenplays of Spies and Headlong and Skios.
Oh, good.
And we're still trying to set them up. It takes ages to set up films. Whether I very much doubt all 3 will get set up, but even if you get one away, I'd be rather pleased. I did once. Usually, an idea has its form written on it. That's what part of what the idea is seeing how to do it. But I did once write a play called Now You Know, which I had terrible struggles with. And when I'd written it, it didn't seem to have come to life. And I thought, what's the problem? The problem is we need to know what those characters are thinking, which you can do in a novel, which you can't really do in a play. So I wrote it again as a novel in which I had access to the thinking, inside the heads of all the characters. And the novel was published, did moderately or whatever, but after it had come out, then I thought, now I know what's going on inside the heads of the characters. I'll write it again as a play, because that's the position that we're mostly in life, is looking at the outside of other people's heads and trying to work out from what they say and what they do, what they're thinking and feeling. So I then wrote it as a play, and it was done as a play. I have to say it wasn't a great success either as a novel or a play.
So the answer to the question is that everything that could be turned into a film or television has been or is in the process of being done. There's nothing that is lingering.
No, I
waiting
once wrote a film version for television of an earlier novel called Landing on the Sun. Fiendishly difficult, because it's all someone looking at old files and old paperwork and trying to work out from that what's happened. And I saw it, it was transmitted about, I don't know, 20 years ago. I saw it again. I watched it again about 5 years ago. And I couldn't understand it for the life of me. And I wrote it. So what other people must have made it, I can't begin to imagine.
Writing is hard work, you've said. And it is. I mean, sitting in front. Do you write on paper or on a computer these days?
Oh, word processor, yeah. They're lovely. Because if you touch type, you appear to be thinking directly onto the screen. There appears to be no mechanical process between you and the words appearing on the paper. And also, you can endlessly correct and improve things very easily, and that's very helpful.
I'll come back to that, but I was going to say, so when you sit down and you look at a blank screen, you just have an automatic relationship with it. You don't think, blimey, what am I going to... You don't. Well, the reason I ask is my husband's got 6 ideas for books in his head. Has he written a page? No. And it's the blank page or the blank screen that seems to intimidate him. So what's your advice?
No, what's intimidating him is having 6 ideas and not 1 idea. Because the trouble is, when it comes down to it, we don't want 6 ideas. You want one idea to work on at a time, and then when that's done, you want another idea coming. So that's what it's sheer prolific intellectual activity which is holding him up. But there is a bad moment when you look at the screen to start, and whatever word you write down, you think, no successful novel or play has ever started with that word.
And do you redraft as Tolstoy did? And of course his wife had to handwrite all his various redrafts. When you're mentioning War and Peace, which is quite a long book.
It's a very long book, yes, and his wife had to copy draft after draft out. Yes, I do a lot of rewriting, a lot of redrafting.
Now, isn't it the case that because you're using a word processor and you were talking about revisions and corrections and so on, so it means that in generations to come, people can't look back at early drafts the way it's interesting to look back at early drafts of T.S. Eliot or so, because they don't exist anymore, because it's only the finished copy that finally reaches the public eye.
So who is going to be the worse off for that? Apart from all the many people studying literature at universities,
yes, well, exactly,
who've got to find some material to write their theses about.
Yes, have you ever been the subject of a thesis out of interest?
Have I ever been the subject of a thesis?
Yes.
Occasionally, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the trouble is, but when people have written a thesis about it, they send it to you. And it seems extremely rude not to read it.
But
often, I can't understand what people have said about it.
Oh, wrong glasses. Yes, here. Could you wait for the mic? Where is it? Thanks.
I just want to ask a question about Copenhagen, if I may. I remember hearing an interview you gave saying you did an enormous amount of research on it, and I'm reading the postscript at the moment, and obviously that's very evident. Are you able to quantify how much time it took you to do the research for Copenhagen? And second, if I just might quickly ask, you also mentioned meeting Heisenberg's son after the New York premiere, and I'm really interested to know, would you, on reflection, would you have wanted to have met him before writing about Heisenberg? Would you have wanted that, or are you quite happy with what you did?
You must remind us what Copenhagen is.
Yes, Copenhagen is a play about a meeting between two great physicists, Werner Heisenberg, who was German, and Niels Bohr, who was a Dane. And they were very old friends and collaborators. They'd developed quantum mechanics together in the 1920s. And the problem was with this meeting, it was in 1941, and the Germans had occupied Denmark, and it was very embarrassing for Niels Bohr to receive a German visitor, even an old friend. And Heisenberg obviously wanted to say something very important to Niels Bohr, and the question is, what was it he wanted to say? What was his intention in going to Copenhagen? So it's about human intention. And when I first began to write the play, I did indeed. I know nothing about science at all, but I did study philosophy. And if you study philosophy, you can't help but come across quantum mechanics because it's got such weird philosophical implications. So I knew something about what Heisenberg and Bohr had been doing in the 1920s, but I had to do a great deal of research. And even after I'd done all the research, I sat down to write the play, I felt even more inhibited than usual because I don't think I'd ever written about real characters before. And I knew that whatever I did, there was no way, or I'd read everything that Heisenberg and Bohr had written, but I hadn't heard them speak, and I knew that whatever I did, I couldn't make it like the original Heisenberg and Bohr. But, as with other characters, after a bit, even though Heisenberg and Bohr were based on real characters, they took on a sort of fictitious life of their own and began to speak and act for themselves, just as fictitious characters do. And I think with hindsight, my Heisenberg has quite a lot of differences, in spite of all my efforts, from the real Heisenberg. And as I explained in the postscript to the published text, on the first night of the play in New York, everyone in a terrible state of nerves. At the end of the show, I met a very tall, imposing man who said, "I am Werner Heisenberg's son, Johann Heisenberg." And I was extremely frightened because he'd just spent 2 hours looking at my fictitious version of his father. And he said, "I have to tell you that your Heisenberg is nothing like my father." He said, "I never saw my father express strong feeling, express any emotions at all about anything except music." But then he said an absolutely wonderful thing, which made it all worthwhile, I thought. He said, "I understand that in a play, you have to have characters who are rather more forthcoming than that." And that seems to me to have put his finger on what the point is, if there is a point, in writing fiction about historical events. That provided you make absolutely clear that it's fiction and you're not trying to suggest these things really did happen, you can bring out the kind of things, kind of feelings and thoughts that don't get expressed in everyday life, and you make the connections clear between one event and another, kind of connections that don't get made clear in life, because life goes past very fast. And by the time you've started to think, why did he do this, why did she say that, etc., things have moved on. And I thought that was, in the end, I felt encouraged by what he'd said.
And would you have liked to meet this gentleman before you sat down and animated his father?
I don't think it would have made any difference to my view of his father. I don't think there's anything he could have told me or shown me about his father that I couldn't have been told or shown by what his father was reported as saying and what he'd written.
But the implication of what you just said is that and I often think this, that it's easier, not easier, but you can find truth very effectively in drama or fiction in a way that reportage sometimes cannot do. And you, having worked as a journalist and a novelist and a playwright and so on, what do you think?
Well, I think that's true, provided you make clear when you're making things up, when you're actually trying to follow the historical record, when you're basing the fiction on the historical record. I think it's perfectly legitimate to use fiction. And I think, as you say, fiction can often tell you something about the real world that you can't get from having a reported version of it.
Any more? Yes, madam. Oh gosh, you're the wife. Oh, I beg your pardon. The wife.
Forgive me, Michael. If I just add a footnote.
Yes. This is Claire Tomlin.
Because I was with you in Denmark sometimes and in New York, that the Bohr family said that his presentation of Niels Bohr was uncannily like what Niels Bohr was like, and that he spoke like him, and that they were really absolutely felt that he'd got him. And he never says that. So I want to say that.
Well, that's very nice of you to say that. Very nice of the Bohr family to say that. It's not quite true, because one profound alteration I had to make to Niels Bohr was he was famously inarticulate. He was famously fluent in 5 languages, but the difficulty was, people said, to know which language he was being fluent in. And I thought if we were going to spend 2 hours in the company of Niels Bohr, I thought I had to make him a little more articulate and organized than that.
One of the things that comes out in this, in the matchstick plays, is that behind the humour there are some very serious ideas. For instance, there's one called Bing Bong, which is set in an airport, and the story behind the humour is actually very serious. So for comedy to be successful, there really does have to be a serious not a stern, but a serious foundation, doesn't there? It has to say something important.
I think comedy needs a serious basis, because something has to be at issue in comedy. I mean, if there's nothing at issue, if it doesn't matter what happens, it's not funny that something goes wrong for the people who are trying to achieve this. I've sometimes wondered, Noises Off, the farce I wrote about the theatre, is done, when it was first done in England, it's about actors doing an English sex farce. People said, okay, well, it would work in this country because people are familiar with English sex farce, but it wouldn't work anywhere else in the world because they've never seen an English sex farce. Well, it's been done all over the world, and I wonder sometimes what it is that catches people's fancy about it. And I think it's because it's really about people struggling to carry on with their planned life in the face of total disaster. And I think all of us have a fear, and this is to be solemn for a moment, I think all of us have a fear inside ourselves of breakdown. We fear that we might not be able to continue with the show. And it does happen. People do have breakdowns and can't continue with the show. They can't go out of their room, sit down and cry in the corner or whatever. And I think when people in the audience see this happening to some idiots up on the stage, these stupid actors, when they see them unable to go on with the show, it releases something about their own fear.
So absurdity is core to the human condition.
Yeah. I mean, what I think is absolutely central to the human condition is that people are trying to do things all the time. Everyone has got a project. And it might be a very simple project like trying to get enough food to stay alive. Or it might be a very complicated project like writing a symphony. It might be something good, trying to help other people, or it might be something totally bad, trying to destroy other people's lives. But everyone has got a project they're trying to push forward. When I first began to write comic novels, I was very influenced by Evil in War, who absolutely wonderful comic novelist. But the essence of his comedy is that people are helpless. His heroes are always extremely decent people with a religious view of the world who find that they are pushed around helplessly by the evil people in the world and by expectations of society and so forth, and they can't do anything about it. Well, it took me years to see this is not the way I see human beings. I don't think they are entirely helpless. We're all struggling all the time, and sometimes we win, sometimes we lose, but we're all struggling to do something. So when, to bring it back to the question of farce, when Noises Off was first done in Russia in 1988 or 89, this was still in the Gorbachev era, and they didn't do farce in the Soviet Union. They never played farce, hadn't even played Feydeau, a classic farce. So what did they do? They thought, okay, this is a play about some actors. They're probably not very good actors, and they're trying to put a play on. It's probably not a very good play. But obviously, they're giving it their best shot. They're trying to do a good production of the play. So they played it seriously. And comedy is always funnier if you play it seriously. And they saw that these actors had a project that they were trying to pursue and being partly defeated and partly succeeding. They do actually manage to get to the end of the show. Curiously, when this was turned into a film, Noises Off, by Peter Bogdanovich in America. And my play ends when the actors have done this show and made a total mess of it. That's the end of my play. And Peter Bogdanovich explained that it's in the aesthetic, part of the aesthetic of popular entertainment in America, that everything has to end on a positive note. And the setting of the play was transferred to America. It was about a company of American actors touring a play around America. And Peter Bogdanovich explained that before the film ends, that hopeless sex farce that they're dragging around the provinces has to have been done on Broadway and been a success, and that all the characters will have to have got their relationships sorted out with each other, and there has to be a positive message for humanity. And fortunately, I was not writing the screenplay, somebody else was. But I got a desperate call from Peter Bogdanovich after the film was finished, saying they were test screening it, as they say, in the valley, the San Fernando Valley, and everything went quite well up to the last 10 minutes when the audiences were walking out. And would I sort it out for them? So I said I didn't want to go all the way to Los Angeles, but if he would bring the film to New York, I would go to New York, and I would see what I could do. And he said, I can only get 2 more days shooting. So I saw the film in New York, and I saw, oh my God, they had a problem at the end, because in the last 10 minutes, that show has suddenly, out of nowhere, become a success on Broadway, and all the relationships have been sorted out, and you've got to get this positive message in. And you could only get 2 more days shooting to fix this. So I said I would write some more screenplay to get, at any rate, the beginnings of that story up to the front of the film, so they're just about to do the show on Broadway before the film opens, so we can get it done very quick, get all these things fixed very quickly at the end. So that's what he did, and that was the version of the film that was made. Never a great success, I'm afraid. It's really an inherently staged play. And because I'd done it at such short notice, it hadn't occurred to me to get a contract for this work. It was made by Disney, who are not short of a bob or two, or $1 or $2. And because I got a contract, they paid me $500 for it, which in film terms is like giving a tip to the man who opens the door of the car for you.
What did your agent say?
But my agent, too late for him to say anything, because I haven't got a contract.
We've got time for a final question. Yes, sir.
Is there any difference between theatre of the absurd and farce?
Is there any difference between theatre of the absurd and farce? Yes, I think there is. I think farce, as soon as you try to say what farce is, the definition breaks down. And I wouldn't want to be prescriptive about this, but I think if you think of most farces, they are about simplified versions of real people facing real embarrassments and getting into real panics. Traditionally, they're about people who are engaged in some illicit sexual activity which they're trying to conceal from their wives and the world, who are suddenly in danger of getting caught out. And they have to invent something, tell a lie to get out of the situation. And of course that doesn't make anything better. It's just like the government, when governments try to do a cover-up, it never makes anything better. It always makes things worse. And it always makes things worse in farces, because then they have to think of another lie to conceal the lie they've told first, and so on, escalating panic. But there has to be something, even if it's a very two-dimensional farce, there has to be something serious at issue. You have to think, those characters have to think they're going to be disgraced in some kind of terrible way. My actors have to think they're going to be stuck in front of the audience with none of the props working and being unable to do the play as written. And the theatre of the absurd, I think the point is that life has absolutely taken leave of the normal pressures of reality. And is pure invention, pure ridiculousness. So I think there is a considerable formal difference.
Matchbox Theatre, Michael Frayn will be signing it immediately in the signing tent next door. Michael, your ways with words have made the world, and particularly this tent, a happier and much wiser place. Thank you very much for coming. Please thank Michael Frayn.